Picture this, right? You're standing on the edge of a misty rainforest in Costa Rica.
Oh, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can hear these deep, echoing calls of howler monkeys moving through the canopy right above you. And you look down, and there's this rich, dark, volcanic dirt all over your hands.
This has been working.
Exactly. You just spent the entire morning planting native tree seedlings along a restored riverbank. So you're physically tired, but your heart is completely full. And in a few hours, you know you're going to sit down and share a meal prepared by a local family using ingredients they pulled straight from the garden behind their house.
You know, for a long time, that specific scenario felt like a highly curated fantasy. Or like a luxury retreat reserved for people willing to spend thousands of dollars just to feel connected to the earth.
Right, like an exclusive VIP eco experience.
Exactly. But the amazing thing we are finding in the materials today is that this isn't a fantasy anymore.
No, it's not. It's actually becoming the baseline reality of travel in 2026. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are digging into a massive stack of recent sources, industry reports, and environmental data, all focused on sustainable travel and ecotourism.
And there's a lot to cover.
There really is.
Yeah.
The core mission for us today is to help you figure out how you can see the world without destroying it. We want to cut right through the corporate jargon and find out what actually works, both mathematically and ethically, when you book your next flight.
But before we even evaluate the data, I think we have to look at how these sources define their terms, because we hear words like sustainable thrown around in travel marketing the same way, all natural gets slapped on a sugary cereal box.
Totally. It just loses all meaning.
Right. It becomes a buzzword. But in these reports, the UN Environment Program is applying a really strict three-pillar metric. It operates practically like a ruthless audit.
So how does a hotel or a tour actually pass that audit?
Well, for a tourism operation to actually be labeled sustainable, it must generate verifiable economic income for the local community. It must preserve local cultural heritage, and it has to minimize environmental pollution.
Okay, so all three.
Yes. If a hotel isn't hitting all three of those pillars, it fails the audit. Full stop. And then ecotourism, which we'll also talk about, is a subset of that. It focuses almost entirely on responsible visits to fragile natural wilderness areas.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. So if sustainable tourism is this massive umbrella that covers everything from like the supply chain of a downtown London business hotel to the fuel efficiency of a trans-Pacific flight, then ecotourism is just a specific spoke on that umbrella focused purely on the wilderness.
That's a perfect analogy, and the sheer scope of that umbrella is what makes the current data so compelling right now. The whole industry is undergoing this massive structural transformation, and it's driven entirely by consumer demand.
People actually want this now.
Oh, massively. The 2025 data shows that 93% of global travelers actively want to make sustainable choices.
Wow, 93%.
Yeah. And in the Asian market alone, 77% of travelers are prioritizing sustainable options, which is a huge leap from 68% just the prior year. We are analyzing a global sustainable tourism market that's projected to hit $11.53 trillion by 2033.
That's just a staggering amount of money. But reading through the environmental data in these sources, there's this fascinating paradox that jumped out at me.
The emissions data.
Yes. The tourism sector's carbon emissions actually fell 9.3% between 2019 and 2024. So tourism now accounts for 7.3% of global emissions, down from 8.3%. And the emissions intensity, which means like the sheer amount of carbon produced per individual traveler, that dropped by 15%.
Right, and the mechanics behind that drop are largely technological. Commercial aviation has introduced much lighter aircraft materials and vastly more efficient jet engines.
So the planes themselves are just burning less fuel.
Exactly. And on the ground, major hotel chains have completely overhauled their HVAC systems. So they use a fraction of the electricity per guest compared to a decade ago. Basically, the industry is generating way more economic value while producing fewer emissions per individual trip.
So what does this all actually mean? Because to me, it sounds like we figured out how to bake lower-calorie cookies.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. But because we're eating 10 times as many boxes of those cookies, we're still gaining weight.
Yeah.
Are we actually making a dent in the environmental impact? Because the sheer volume of middle-class global citizens taking international flights is just exploding.
You hit the nail on the head. That volume is the central crisis these reports highlight. The carbon footprint per traveler is shrinking, sure, but the total number of bodies moving across the globe completely overwhelms those efficiency gains.
It's just too many people traveling all at once.
And the physical waste metrics are particularly alarming. The sources note that if current consumption trends hold, tourist-generated solid waste could hit 205 million tons annually by 2034.
205 million tons.
Annually. That represents roughly 7% of all global solid waste, generated entirely by people on vacation.
That is terrifying. Which brings up a critical question about how the industry arrived at this tipping point in the first place. Because this level of urgency, it feels new.
It is relatively new. Tracing the historical context in the sources reveals a really distinct evolution in how the industry views its own footprint. If you look back at the 1980s, the operational philosophy was simply damage control.
Like, just stop people from breaking things.
Pretty much. They were just trying to stop the outright destruction of coral reefs and ancient forests caused by mass tourism, just stopping the bleeding. But by the 2010s, the framework shifted when the UN tied global tourism to their 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, so a shift from defense to offense.
Exactly. The mandate moved from merely stopping damage to actually attempting to create positive economic benefits for the locals.
And according to the sources, 2026 marks the era of reorientation and regeneration.
Yes. The pandemic, which obviously overlapped with all these escalating climate events, it forced a systemic restructuring. The goal is no longer just maintaining a fragile status quo. Regeneration implies leaving a destination demonstrably healthier and more resilient than it was before the tourist even arrived.
But, and I have to play devil's advocate here, with $1 trillion of consumer demand on the table for eco-friendly experiences, we inevitably run into the dark side of this industry, right?
Greenwashing.
Yes. Whenever 93% of the market demands a specific label, corporations are going to figure out how to fake that label. If the sheer volume of travel is so high, how much of this quote-unquote regeneration is just a marketing department lying to us?
It's a very valid concern, and the concept of carbon offsets provides a perfect case study for that exact skepticism. The reports show that eco-labels and offsets frequently function as a convenient hall pass. They allow companies to avoid making difficult, expensive operational changes.
Let's look really closely at offsets, because for a decade, the standard advice given to travelers was simple. You fly wherever you want, you pay an extra $20 to a platform like Atmosphere at checkout, they plant some trees somewhere, and boom, your flight is magically carbon neutral.
Right, that was the dream. But the sources show a massive institutional pivot away from that exact model. Major operators are just abandoning it.
Wait, really? Who is dropping it?
Well, Intrepid Travel is a huge example. They operate in 117 countries, and they completely scrapped their carbon offset program in 2025. They actually audited the results and realized the fundamental math simply does not work as a primary climate strategy.
I mean, the timeline mismatch there is what makes the offset model so flawed to me. You burn a ton of jet fuel flying over the Atlantic today. That carbon heats the atmosphere today. Paying a third party to plant a sapling that might sequester a ton of carbon 20 years from now.
If it even survives.
Right, assuming it doesn't burn down in a forest fire. That just does not solve the immediate atmospheric physics problem.
And Intrepid recognized that reality. So instead of outsourcing their guilt, they diverted that money into a $2 million climate impact fund.
Oh, that's interesting. What are they doing with that fund?
They are using those funds to transition their own global fleet to electric vehicles, and they're heavily subsidizing sustainable aviation fuels. The consensus across the scientific reports is absolute on this. You have to prioritize direct emission reductions at the source and only utilize offsets for the tiny fractional percentage of emissions that cannot currently be engineered out of existence.
That makes so much more sense. But the greenwashing issue isn't just contained to carbon accounting, is it? The sources detail a deeply unsettling reality regarding wildlife and human rights. It's so easy to focus on atmospheric gases and forget what happens on the ground when ethics are bypassed for profit.
Oh, absolutely. The 2025 IUCN Congress vote illustrates the severity of this land use conflict. They passed Motion 130 with an overwhelming 98% majority.
And what did that motion actually do?
It specifically mandated strict restrictions on tourism infrastructure inside protected areas. They essentially had to formally remind developers that national parks exist for ecological conservation. They are not there to serve as scenic backdrops for a new luxury resort.
Wow. And the wildlife exploitation metrics in these reports show how easily well-meaning tourists are misled. The reports outline operations offering things like orangutan kickboxing, which sounds insane, or elephant painting.
It is insane, but operations like that exploit a loophole. They just slap an educational or sanctuary label on their marketing to bypass regulatory scrutiny.
So they just call it a sanctuary and people believe
That basically, yeah. But the peer-reviewed studies in our stat confirm that these spectacle-driven encounters do absolutely nothing to foster genuine conservation motivation in the public. And the marine park industry is experiencing a very similar reckoning right now.
Yeah, the financial pressure there is finally yielding results. The report showed that most major global travel groups have entirely stopped selling tickets to facilities holding orcas or dolphins in captivity.
Right. Tour Group fully pulled out in late 2025.
Although the sources specifically note that TUI remains the last major international travel company still actively supporting and selling marine park packages.
Yes, they are the main holdout. But, the human cost of these mislabeled conservation efforts is equally severe. Investigations detailed in the reports focused on specific nature conservancies in Kenya.
This part was incredibly dark.
It really was. These are tracts of land utilized for ecotourism and carbon credit sequestration projects, initiatives that, on paper, look impeccable on a corporate sustainability report.
But the investigations revealed those exact carbon credit projects were masking forced evictions and human rights abuses against the indigenous populations living on that land. The land was essentially seized just to sell green feelings to Western tourists.
Which demonstrates exactly why a shiny green leaf logo on a booking website is totally insufficient. True sustainability requires auditing the social and ethical track record of an operation, not just calculating its carbon footprint.
Okay, so if you are listening to this right now and realizing that offsets are structurally flawed, wildlife labels are manipulated, and carbon credits can literally hide human rights violations, you're probably wondering how on earth to navigate this.
It feels overwhelming.
Exactly. If consumers cannot trust the marketing and the industry struggles to police itself, who is stepping into that vacuum?
Well, European lawmakers are stepping into the vacuum. The era of unregulated, self-awarded green labels is effectively ending through actual legislation.
You're talking about the new EU directive.
Right. The European Union's empowering consumers for the Green Transition Directive, the ECGT. This is the main mechanism forcing this change, and it goes into full effect in September 2026.
And what does it actually change for a regular person booking a hotel?
It makes it fundamentally illegal to broadcast vague, misleading environmental claims without mandatory verified proof. So a hotel can no longer legally market itself as eco-friendly or climate neutral simply because they ask guests to reuse their towels. Right. They must undergo rigorous third-party supply chain audits to substantiate any public environmental claim they make.
And France is implementing a system that makes this incredibly visible to the consumer. Under their climate and resilience law, by 2026, every single hotel in the country must display a verified environmental score ranging from A to E.
I love that system. It functions exactly like the sanitation grade in a restaurant window. If a hotel receives an E, every guest walking through the lobby knows that business is actively failing the environment.
That level of mandatory transparency alters consumer behavior immediately. Nobody wants to stay in an E hotel. But legislation is kind of the stick. The carrot is the industry's organic shift toward regenerative tourism and solving this huge problem of tourism leakage.
Tourism leakage.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I keep seeing this term tourism leakage in the economic data. The first time I read it, honestly, it sounded like a hotel plumbing issue.
It does sound like that. But the plumbing analogy actually works perfectly to explain the economics of it.
How?
Think of a local island economy like a massive water tank. Tourism revenue is supposed to be the rain filling that tank to support the entire community.
Okay, I'm with you. But when you stay at a massive multinational hotel chain, eat imported food at their proprietary restaurant, and book excursions through their global parent company, you have essentially drilled massive holes in the bottom of the water tank.
Precisely. The revenue pours in from your wallet, but it immediately drains out of the country. It gets funneled back to a corporate headquarters in another hemisphere.
So the local community receives almost zero economic benefit, but they are left managing the sewage, the water depletion, and the traffic that you created on your vacation.
Exactly. And regenerative tourism focuses entirely on patching those holes in the tank. Countries like Norway, England, Portugal, and Turkey are actively restructuring their national tourism frameworks right now. They want to ensure that local entrepreneurs, farmers, and guides are the primary financial beneficiaries of the visitor economy.
And that localization ties directly into the fascinating transport and behavioral trends emerging in 2026. Because transportation accounts for roughly 70% of tourism's total carbon emissions. And it seems like travelers are finally adjusting how they move.
They are. The Swap the Sky initiative operating between Amsterdam and Berlin is a prime example. They are heavily subsidizing and promoting rail and ferry routes over short-haul flights.
The sleeper train renaissance is honestly my favorite data point in all these sources. There are new luxury sleeper buses and trains connecting hubs like Zurich to Amsterdam, Brussels, and Barcelona.
It's brilliant.
It is. You board a beautifully designed, comfortable cabin in Switzerland, you go to sleep, and you wake up in Spain. And the mechanism here is incredible. That journey generates less than 10% of the carbon emissions of an equivalent flight, and you completely bypass airport security.
Which is a huge win in itself. And the purpose of the trip is evolving alongside the transportation. The sources identify a rising demographic known as the skill sourcer.
The skill sourcer. This is essentially the death of the superficial checklist tourist, right?
Right. People are bypassing the crowded monuments to travel for actual education. They are embedding with local artisans to learn traditional crafts, or they're participating in field conservation.
But I have to push back on this concept just a little bit. Isn't there a massive risk that paying to do conservation work just devolves into poverty tourism or greenwashed entertainment? I mean, how does an untrained tourist actually help a marine biologist?
It is a totally valid concern, and it entirely depends on the accreditation of the program. If a hotel staff member is just handing you a shovel for an hour to plant a bush, yeah, it's just entertainment.
Right.
But if the program is directly integrated with a local university or a recognized NGO, then the tourist's fee funds the actual peer-reviewed science. And their manual labor genuinely aids in large-scale data collection that the scientists couldn't afford to do otherwise.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. And this push for lower impact experiences also brings us to quietcations. Travelers are actively seeking out silent retreats and serene, low-tech environments.
And the environmental utility of a quietcation is actually highly measurable.
Really? How so?
Well, high-octane resort entertainment requires immense electrical loads, and it generates severe noise pollution. That fundamentally disrupts the breeding and feeding patterns of local wildlife. By choosing silence, you directly lower the ambient stress on the surrounding ecosystem.
That makes total sense. So taking all of these macro trends, the legislation, the leakage, the transport shifts, we need to translate this into a practical, boots-on-the-ground playbook for the listener's next booking.
Let's do it.
Where are the models working best right now, and how should a traveler operate within them?
Well, looking at the destination data, Madeira, Portugal has surged to the top of the trending list for 2026, actually surpassing major hubs like Milan.
And the mechanism behind Madeira's success is just brilliant. They utilize their levadas, which are this 3,000-kilometer network of historic stone irrigation channels that wind through the UNESCO-protected Lower Silva Forest.
Right, they repurpose them.
Yes. By converting these into low-impact hiking trails, they physically distribute the foot traffic across the entire island. It prevents any single ecosystem from experiencing the crushing weight of over-tourism. The data highlights villages like São Vicente, which are absorbing visitors sustainably without losing their quiet authenticity.
Turkey provides another really strong model. They currently lead the United Nations Best Tourism Villages list with 4 separate entries: Akyaka, Anetli, Barbaros, and Kale-Ukagis.
And the reason those Turkish villages succeeded in the UN audit is because they actually capped daily visitor numbers, and they prioritized homestays over new massive hotel construction.
Exactly. They are dispersing the wealth into rural areas while keeping their new concrete footprint practically at zero.
Any other standouts in the data?
Yeah. Other regions maintaining strong, verified, sustainable growth include Namibia's Etosha National Park, which utilizes very strict conservation zoning. Dominica continues to operate as the nature island of the Caribbean. Vietnam is seeing a massive internal shift, with 81% of their inbound travelers demanding sustainable infrastructure.
And of course, Costa Rica.
Oh, obviously. They remain the foundational pioneer in all this. They've proven over decades that rigorous environmental education can generate profound economic stability for local communities.
So destination is only the first variable. The physical choices you make before you even head to the airport alter the math significantly. For instance, the sources mandate packing light.
Yes, and this isn't just about convenience, it's basic physics.
Right. Every extra kilo in your suitcase adds literal weight to the aircraft. Increased weight requires increased engine thrust, which burns more jet fuel, which directly pumps more carbon into the atmosphere. So drop the third pair of shoes.
Absolutely. And if flying is unavoidable, prioritizing direct flights alters that math even further. A massive percentage of commercial aviation fuel is burned simply fighting gravity during takeoff and the complex maneuvering of landing. Eliminating layovers entirely eliminates those high-emission events.
Okay, so you packed light, you took a direct flight. When selecting accommodations, the data says ignore the marketing copy on a hotel's website completely. Use the GSTC official directory.
The Global Sustainable Tourism Council.
Exactly. They maintain a database where you can enter a property's unique certification code to verify they've actually passed a rigorous third-party audit. It cuts right through the greenwashing.
And once you're on the ground, the simplest behavioral shift is the skip the clean rule. Just leaving the do not disturb sign on your door and opting out of daily linen washing saves thousands of gallons of water and immense energy loads over the lifespan of a hotel.
And let's not forget food. Food supply chains represent another massive intervention point. The reports heavily criticize massive all-inclusive resorts, which consistently generate the absolute highest figures for gross food waste.
It's staggering how much they throw away.
It is. Eating at family-run establishments patches that tourism leakage we discussed earlier. Furthermore, significantly reducing your beef consumption while visiting tropical or island destinations eliminates the huge carbon footprint required to import that meat across oceans via refrigerated cargo ships.
The overarching theme in the data is that optimizing these choices fundamentally alters your entire relationship with the destination. You're participating in it, not just consuming it.
I want to ask you directly, evaluating all the complex data in these reports. If a listener is overwhelmed right now and can only commit to one single structural change for their next trip, what is the absolute highest impact lever they can pull?
Without a doubt, the most powerful intervention is slowing down the velocity of travel, taking one comprehensive 3-week trip instead of 4 fragmented weekend flights throughout the year.
Just because it alters the transportation emissions math so heavily.
Well, it drastically cuts the aviation emissions, yes, but it also transforms your economic footprint. Think about it. When a traveler stays in one location longer, they inevitably exhaust the high-impact, concentrated tourist zones after a few days.
That's true. You get bored of the main square.
Right. And then they begin utilizing municipal public transit. They eat in actual residential neighborhoods. They transition from extracting a rapid series of photographs to genuinely engaging with the local economy. Slow travel diffuses the impact and deepens the financial benefit for the host country.
Which really brings us to the synthesis of this entire deep dive. Operating sustainably is not a mandate for sacrifice. It doesn't require your vacation to be arduous or less joyful.
Not at all.
It is just a recognition that travel is, at its core, a transaction of hospitality. We are receiving the beauty and the resources of a destination, and we carry an ethical and economic obligation to return care to that environment.
You know, the listener holds immense economic leverage here. Every euro you spend and every kilometer you travel casts a direct vote for the future of these communities.
Exactly.
That capital can either reward the operations that are actively regenerating the planet, or it can just continue to fund the systems exploiting it.
Before we conclude, I want to return to that staggering metric we discussed earlier. 205 million tons of tourist waste projected annually by 2034. Think about that pristine remote island beach you might be dreaming of escaping to right now. A place where you just want to get away from the grind. When you finish a plastic bottle or discard a piece of packaging in that paradise, where exactly is away?
It's a great point, because the reality is that remote, pristine locations rarely possess the industrial recycling infrastructure or municipal waste processing plants that we take for granted in major cities.
So does your relaxing week off leave a permanent physical burden buried in the soil for the local community to manage long after your flight home? It is a very heavy question, but it is the exact question these sources are demanding we ask ourselves.
It really is.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel equipped with the mechanics and the data to navigate the world in 2026. Travel well, travel thoughtfully, and the next time you find yourself with dirt on your hands in a misty Costa Rican rainforest, you'll know exactly the positive impact you are making.